Okay. This is rather different to the other presentation we got here. This is some discussion of something that happened 55 years ago, 52 years ago. It involves radio astronomy rather than optical astronomy. It's a historical piece. And I'm just a minor person involved in this, but I was contacted by Miller Goss, who was the director of the National Radio Astronomy Observatory in the US for many years. Some years ago to help with some work they were doing on some reanalysis of some observations made in 1962. Early 60s about an occultation of a quasar. So it's there's an interesting bit of background there. I thought it would be useful just to run through this paper or this presentation, just as a recollect how occultations have at various times had a huge impact upon our larger understanding of astronomy. And this is a set of issues which the occultation role had a huge impact on our knowledge of things, but because of some internal issues involving the people involved, the significance and of what had happened is often not understood or appreciated. Sort of thing where you start thinking about Nobel Prizes, but some of the crap that went on behind the scenes, which I won't go into, ruled all that out. So, this is it's a presentation that's been given in a number of places. And I'm very much the minor player in this. In fact, in 62 I was 11 years old, so all this happened in my childhood. Anyway, next slide. C273, that's a number, it's in a catalogue of radio sources. It was the first quasar, first radio jet, first inverted spectrum radio source. That is, it's the slope of the spectrum, the brightness was the opposite direction to what you expect. First time they had a radio source to a location to better than an arc second back in those days, so if they got it to within half a degree they were doing well. First time they had sub-arc second radio structure. First time they established a tie between the radio reference frame and the optical reference frame. First detection of a variable extragalactic radio source, and in fact the first detection of a black hole. Now, that's a Hubble image of 3C273. You can see there something which looks like a star in the centre. And then at the bottom right, in sort of about 4 o'clock position, looks like somebody's drawn scraped a line on it. That's a jet. It's a radio emission jet going out at the end. One of the interesting things is I got that image off an European space, an ESO website, and the caption said, this object was discovered by somebody, and the somebody had absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with the discovery. Next slide. So this is just the background of this presentation. If you go back to before this time period, concepts of extragalactic radar, the huge expansion of things was not well understood. The discovery of 273 made huge changes in our understanding of the universe, but its discovery is not widely known or appreciated. I'd expect most of you in the room wouldn't have much appreciation of its significance. And the author of this paper, including one directly involved in the discovery, which is Cyril Hazard, have reviewed the historical records. Now, that's on the top left is Cyril Hazard. Top right, Mark Schmidt, who was at Palomar. Centre bottom, John Bolton. He was a leading radio astronomer here in Australia. Who had a major role to play in what happened and did not happen. Tom Matthews was behind, the other two very much behind the scenes. Now the telescopes involved in this, next slide. On the top left, that's the Parkes radio telescope here in Australia, which was commissioned at the start of 1962. If the shape looks familiar, NASA designed their deep space communication dishes on this telescope design. It was the telescopes in the early designs, they were like Green Bank and so forth. They built the telescopes to be rigid. The Parkes telescope was designed by a guy from the UK, involved, I think it was Lancaster bombers, and the dish shape is designed to sag but maintain its shape as it sags, so it keeps its shape very accurately wherever it's pointing. Okay, that's peripheral. There's the Palomar 200-inch telescope, and there's the OVRO, I forget which telescope that is, but that's somewhere in the States. Next slide. All this happened in 1962. There were, in very early days, they got, the Parkes telescope was commissioned end of 61, start of 62. The Nautical Almanac office in the UK, they started generating lunar occultation predictions of radio sources because there was a hope to identify or correlate a radio source with something you can see optically by using a lunar occultation to identify its location by getting the disappearance and the reappearance, pinpoint exactly where the object was. When this started, the Parkes telescope couldn't track the moon, only the source. On May 15, they were able to see, they recorded an occultation event and saw diffraction fringes, which meant they were able to detect resolution type issues. But they only got one event on it because the moon hadn't risen for one of the events. They only got one of the events. August the 5th, they got both an immersion and immersion, and on October 26th, they got the immersion only. And it was the August and October events which all the focus has been on. one of the issues, because of the importance of trying to identify where the radio sources were, they were prepared to do anything to make sure that they could get the dish pointed at the source. Now, go back to 1962, computers, as we know them, didn't exist. It was all hand-type calculations. The predictions they were working with were done for Sydney, which is about 400 kilometres away from Parkes. And they were concerned about the altitude. The Parkes dish couldn't go below 30 degrees. And to ensure that they could get to record the event, they actually started attacking the dish, which was brand new, and digging ditches so that the dish could get down low enough. But it turned out it wasn't actually necessary. Here are some light curves that they generated. We're used to light curves going from left to right. These light curves go from right to left. Not that it probably matters all that much. And sorry, I shouldn't have. I should mention change the slide. The two light curves, the top and the bottom, are done at different frequencies. Think of them as being different colours, but a significantly different colour. The first, the top light curve doesn't show much. The second light curve, the bottom light curve, there's a clear anomaly in the way the light curve disappears as an A and B component identified. So at the 410 megahertz, it was clearly a double source, and it was aligned so that both components reappeared together, but at disappearance they were separate. Next slide. And from that, they determined that separation between the two components was around about 20 arc seconds. Next slide. And this is sort of some of the historical stuff. On August the 20th, John Bolton, who's the head of the radio team in Australia, wrote to Martin Schmidt at Palomar. And from the August observation, he presented these coordinates, but we don't know actually how he derived the coordinates. He's got an interesting PS. The position is subject to arithmetic errors as yet undetected. Don't know how he got there, and there's nothing to indicate what he did to get it. And this is in the days before computers. From Australia, if you wanted to communicate with the UK, send something to Nautical Almanac office, you'd assume a letter would take a week to get to England and another week to come back. It was all very tedious stuff. Next slide. Now this is an image, it's come from Palomar. The black circle in the centre was the stellar centre part of the quasar. You can see the jet structure out the side, but the radio positions that John Bolton gave are indicated by the two white crosses. Don't align with that jet. Next slide. Martin Schmidt's looking at it and seeing the alignment with the jet, maybe the radio object was this jet. It'd be good to get a spectrum of it, but what about this big star? What am I going to do with it? How am I going to get the spectrum? The next slide. I'll try to sit through along some of these. With the info that was sent to Schmidt, question to how did Bolton get his position from Cyril Hazard, who made the observations? Did he misread the numbers? And there's a whole heap of questions about the source of those positions. And that information was sent to Schmidt just 2 weeks after the observation, and there was just insufficient time for things to have happened. Big questions. Next slide. Now, the previous slide I showed you, the frequencies were 140 megahertz and 410. This is at 410 and 1420, so different colours. And you notice how at 410 you've got a clear step event with the one at the left-hand end being much fainter than the one on the right-hand side, whereas at 1420 the brightness of the two components is reversed. Shows that there was a very strong colour difference in the radio spectrum between the two sources. So that whilst one object was almost invisible at 136 megahertz, it was the dominant source at 1420 megahertz. Now, next slide. This is from the Nature paper. It's following the October observation. The observations were properly analysed to get the positions, and go on to the next slide. And the two radio sources, instead of being offset to one side from the jet, one is now aligned with a stellar-looking component, and the other part was looking at the end of the jet. I'm getting confused with stuff at my end here, mate. Now, if we then move on to the next slide, Martin Schmidt at Palomar, he figured in order to get a spectrum of the jet, thinking the jet was the radio source and it's just this annoying star, he started off getting a spectrum of the star. And the star spectrum didn't look at all normal. You see the top of here is the spectrum from the stellar component and the comparison spectrum at the bottom. If you go on to the next slide, on February the 6th of 63, you can see here the top spectrum has got highlighted the hydrogen beta gamma delta sequence and where it is in the comparison spectrum. to the next slide. This is Mark Schmidt's explanation. I'll let you read that. So, that's the first time they got a stellar-like object having significant redshifts. Go on to the next slide. We're almost finished. That led to some papers in Nature about star-like object with a large redshift, and that's stuff there. Well, and the final slide, which, and I won't go into this, that's some of the internal politics that went around there. There was an attribution of all the authors to a particular organisation, and Cyril Hazard did not work there. Anyway, that's it. It's an interesting ancient bit of history about occultations, lunar occultations, in the area of radio astronomy, which played a huge role in the early days of identifying radio sources and establishing a whole new class of objects. I remember as a child how frequently on the radio there was reference to quasars and so forth on the morning news. Anyway, interesting bit of history. Any questions? Okay. I guess go on to my next presentation and you can be done with me.
Thank you for that presentation.